There is an epidemic in our country. It has claimed more lives than COVID-19 and has been with us for far longer. It's called the Loneliness Epidemic, and its health consequences dwarf those of any disease outbreak. As much as it will be blamed on lockdowns and recession, it was identified long before the first case of COVID was diagnosed. While it may have been enhanced by social media, the train tracks were always in place. Social media has merely accelerated it. The fact is, there is something unhealthy in our culture, or more specifically, our culture is unhealthy. Diseases of despair have soared over the past decade. Deaths from suicide, alcohol, and drug overdoses reached an all-time high in 2019. Almost 50% of all marriages in the United States will end in divorce or separation. So what is it that's separating us? What has driven this stake between individuals and their partners, their family and friends, and lastly, and most importantly, themselves? Have you ever asked yourself, how was I taught about relationships? Was it ever discussed? Did your parents get along well? Do you ever look at popular culture and wonder why we are inundated with stories of divorce and adultery and breakups and hookups? When I was a kid, every little girl wanted to be a princess. The princess story dominated the relationship narrative for girls, and there were absolutely no books for boys that even began a conversation about partnership. In all of those stories, the girl was orphaned. In the first pages of the book, she was left alone and directionless, fending for herself, and there always seemed to be an old person that was trying to kill her. She was only saved in the end by a single rich prince who promised a lifetime of safety and security based merely on his wealth. And they lived happily ever after. Or did they? We are seeing now in our culture that we do not live happily ever after. Rather, we end up anxious, lonely, materialistic, and scared for our safety with no real partner to turn to and thinking money will fix all of our problems. And as frivolous as early childhood education through culture may seem, these very books and songs and cartoons are the building blocks for today's isolation, anxiety, and loneliness. If you think this is an impossibly minor thing to read a child a story and the impact of that small event can change the world, take a look at the conversations around early education in schools across our country today. What books are being promoted? What narratives are being supported? Do you think these stories will have any impact on the future? What kind of culture do you think these lessons will create? Do you think these children will inherit a less lonely or more lonely world if we don't change course right now? So what if there was a different story? One where the girl wasn't an orphaned princess and she had living family members that loved her and guided her. One where she had a passion in life and her choice of a partner wasn't the one rich snob that showed up on a horse with bags of money to rescue her, but one who she chose. One that would support her goals and dreams and stand by her side even in the worst of storms. A story that spoke of facing fear and finding empathy and gratitude. What if this was the popular narrative? I have done readings of my book series, Kate's First Mate and the Adventures of Kate and Nate, all over the country and found that children really have an appetite, even a desire for these conversations. We talk about the importance of choosing the right first mate, of having empathy and working together, and the consequences of poorly planned choices, and what it feels like to get lost and face our fears. The most exciting and rewarding moments have always been to hear children ask very sophisticated questions within the context of the book's metaphor and not even realize it. Our schools and early education are ground zero for laying the train tracks for the world we want to live in, the one we want our children to inherit. And culture drives this train. Any conversation about a growing loneliness epidemic in adults has to begin with how we are teaching children about partnership today.